So my name is Najma Mohamed. I'm the head of nature-based solutions at the UNEP World Conservation Monitoring Centre. It's a global centre of excellence on biodiversity, an affiliate of the United Nations Environment Programme, and our offices are based in Cambridge. So at UNEP-WCMC, we an institute, as I said, a research centre of excellence with over 250 scientists, interdisciplinary scientists, some coming from the field of biodiversity and ecology, some working on climate. And we really are a centre of excellence supporting partners globally. We work in over 90 countries to really charter pathways for a world where we can live in harmony with nature. We are divided into teams. My team works in an area called nature-based solutions, which is really about finding the most effective ways to work with nature to address some of the critical societal challenges. I think with my background of working at the interface of climate, nature and development, nature-based solutions is quite an exciting area to work in. I think on a deep level, it begins to, it asks us to question our relationship with nature, you know, away from just ignoring the fact that our entire economy, society and communities actually depend on nature. So recognizing that dependency, but also looking to work with nature in a way that we deliver outcomes that's good for people, but also good for the nature that we depend on. So I think there's both a conceptual and mindset shift by working on nature-based solutions, and really it's a very practical-oriented type of work we do. We support countries with the knowledge, evidence, data that they require to really make informed decision-making. We're increasingly trying to bring together biodiversity and social data. So as someone that's worked very interdisciplinary throughout my career, that's quite an exciting advancement in the conservation and biodiversity world to see this deeper engagement with the social sciences, which I think should be very close to the mandate of the Access programme. And I think we work to try to nurture equitable partnerships. Our work is only possible through really good partnerships with global, regional and national and subnational partners, because we are a Cambridge-based organisation. So the success and the impact of our work really hinges on building those deep partnerships so that the work that we do can be sustainable and can actually be relevant and worthwhile in the longer term. I think some of it might have come through already. You know, I think that really the working at the nexus of people, climate and nature. UNEP World Conservation Monitoring Centre, our vision is a vision that's centred on people and nature. I think while trained in the sort of nature side of things, I really have been an interdisciplinary, scientist and someone working at the science policy interface. So continuing that work in maybe, as the biodiversity sector has been quite enjoyable. I think, as I've mentioned, building those partnerships with parts of the world, and I don't come from the UK, so to be able to work with regions that I've engaged with before and to see the centres of knowledge, excellence and expertise, burgeoning, across the world. And I think, the final thing probably is having a team with that interdisciplinary experience. One learns all the time, and you realise as people that are working on the research and evidence how important it is to start moving into the sort of how do we make this work. So to get into the area of policy and governance and finance and making that really strong connections between the data and the evidence, and how we can use that for really better policy making and better financing. So I think it's quite, an exciting area to work at. I think it sounds very exciting and interesting, but it can also be very challenging, because I think when you're exposed to the level of the challenges that we face, it is difficult. I think we've become to understand what climate and environmental anxiety means for people today, but for many of us that have been working in the sector, for sometimes 2 decades or more, to see amid all the science and evidence and understanding we have of where we're heading, that we are still struggling to get the political action and the finance and the policy heading in that direction. That can be difficult to deal with, but I think it's a privilege and a responsibility, I think, to work to try and accelerate that action. So I think definitely UNEP-WCMC, as I've said, our strategy is a nature and people strategy. So I think the social science are incredibly important to understand the root causes and the drivers of the challenges that we're facing. the climate and the nature crisis both share similar drivers, unsustainable patterns of consumption and production, high inequalities. And so I think it's important to understand the diagnosis, but also to work towards the solutions in a more integrated way. So I think having teams that bring this interdisciplinary knowledge is really important. But also when we move towards the uptake of the findings and the recommendations, being able to communicate our findings from sometimes quite complex analytical processes in a way that decision makers can use the recommendations and the findings. We have quite skilled colleagues working particularly on policy influence and uptake and advice. So we try to work with policymakers and understand how we can communicate the findings in a way that it is useful and understandable and can actually support better decision making. We've gone further, I would say. We've established a social science hub at UNEP-WCMC where we try to bring really the strong social science expertise in the organization so that colleagues have access to really good advice on the methodologies that they can adopt in their projects and in the research that they undertake. We also have adopted a code of ethics so that we all, of the research or the project work that engages with people actually follow ethical guidance. And we seek to achieve, obviously, the ethical outcomes for the work that we deliver. So I think the social sciences have been imperative. It's also been very heartening for me as someone that probably, when I started my career, started thinking I was going to work in the conservation sector, but didn't. Worked much more in the climate development, environment sector, much more on nexus issues. And coming back to working in the conservation sector for the last few years, it has been, quite a shift to see the integration of social sciences and social science approaches to delivering on a conservation and a biodiversity mandate, to begin to be more bold in connecting the biodiversity and climate agendas. So the social science is really core and essential to our work, and it's been wonderful to see the growth of the organization and bringing in and attracting social science expertise from law to economics, to governance to, anthropology and behavioral science, to actually be able to adopt social sciences throughout the broad spectrum of the work that we deliver. I started my career in post-apartheid South Africa, so it was an exciting time. It was, young, new democracy. It was coming out of a painful period of our history with a lot of hope and energy to work for the future that we wanted. And that probably shifted my career markedly because I wanted to work at the interface really of justice and sustainability. And I was very fortunate that as a young biology graduate, I did actually have a mix of natural and social sciences at undergrad level. I was pushed into spaces. I worked for an environmental justice organization. We engaged with communities from the offset and connected communities with policymakers, because South Africa was on a trajectory of really an inclusive policy-making process. And it was incredibly exciting. I mean, I think as a young graduate, I was engaging with policymakers, but also with the media, making sure that the science or the evidence or the research findings was communicated in a way that the communities could use and understand it and engage with the research process. So I think those early days of training, of really engaged and research for social impact stayed with me. I would almost say it's been sort of the thread that I've pulled throughout the career. And I do miss the sort of work of engaging at the really grassroots community level. But now I have had an opportunity to engage with other communities, at different levels of decision making and processes. And I still find that is the most exciting and part of the work, to actually really be rooted in place and in the context. But I think it's really impressed upon me as someone that stayed in the science policy practice interface, to think very carefully about the audience, who we engage, who we communicate with, the ethics of the process, to understand my positionality, where and how I enter the sort of research process, to make sure that we can move away from, research as extraction to research as a process of co-creation and co-production and joint diagnosis of problems and solutions. And I'm very grateful to those early days of my career that took me to places where there was a lot of hope and energy around, building engaged and impactful research, academic, practitioner sort of collaborations. And I think it was invaluable training to learn to communicate. Yeah, I think all of those moments of training in science and environmental communication, how to communicate sometimes quite complex social science or socio-ecological systems, was invaluable, you know, throughout my career, to really always try and communicate and understand the language of the audience and understand the importance of engaged and, I guess, impactful research. So when I came to know about Access, I actually figured that I had learned about this network previously. In a very happy coincidence, I was a participant in one of the Access research projects. I very recently moved to Cambridge. I participated in a research project in, you know, the local mosque that I attend, the Cambridge Central Mosque. And when I saw the Access network and saw what it was about, I have really enjoyed, as someone that has worked a lot more in this, at sort of the policy practice side, but I think with very good roots and foundations in the science. Was very excited to learn about the Access network and the sort of vision of building the environmental social sciences, the importance of placing justice and fairness, you know, in the centre of climate and environmental research. And I think it's essential to understand the root causes and the drivers of the crisis, but to find, you know, the solutions. And I think, as someone that has probably had always the challenge of finding a supervisor in one faculty, I'm really happy to see that this type of interdisciplinary collaboration that a network like this can nurture, can be built. And I do hope that a sort of network like this, you know, can continue, you know, long into the future, because I think this is, has been for me the most vibrant spaces to do thinking, to influence policy and practice, has been in the sort of interdisciplinary spaces. And I think it's a wonderful initiative, and it's been a pleasure to be part of today, and I'm looking forward to engaging with the network and the people who will be attending the assembly today.